people have seen you on TV, and you are quite a homely cook. You're quite a gentle cook, not compared to, the foams and the big bangs and
Yeah.
the razzmatazz of everything else. But you did work in a 2 Michelin star restaurant.
I did. I did most of my cooking has been done in restaurants, really. And my training started at Ballymena House with Myrtle Allen, and then after that I went, and after I spent a few years there, during which time we also had an involvement with a restaurant in Paris called La Ferme Irlandaise. But my sort of first professional move, having learned the sort of style of Ballymena cooking, was to go to a restaurant called Arbutus Lodge, which was
Yes.
run by the Ryans, Declan and Michael Ryan, and the Ryan family. And Arbutus was reckoned to be the best restaurant in Ireland at the time, because both Declan and Michael had worked at a very famous restaurant in France, in Roanne, owned by the Trogro brothers.
Yeah.
So they brought back all that expertise and knowledge, which is quite I would say, a more refined style of cooking than what we were doing at Ballymaloe. So that was very refined. It was also a bit of a shock because Ballymaloe kitchen was very busy and very well run, but Arbutus kitchen was run like a French kitchen, and it was very sort of quite serious. I mean, incredible training, and I learned so much there, for which I'm very grateful. But that was the first sort of professional shock of my life. Coming from a kitchen that had evolved from somebody cooking on the Aga to suddenly, we're having people for dinner, to a proper restaurant kitchen with a Michelin star, and all taking ourselves terribly seriously.
Yeah, and I mean, like in that part of the chapter as well, like you go on to talk about how you snapped Nico's spoon.
Yeah, and then what I used to then, once I finished at Arbutus Lodge, I think around then actually, Adrian and I opened the cookery school together, but then we used to only run the cookery school during the winter and the autumn. We used to close for the summer, and I'd go away for 3 or 4 months every summer and work in different restaurants. So one of the restaurants I went to work in was a restaurant called Chez Nico, which had 2 Michelin stars in London, in Battersea. And it was a tiny kitchen, and there were 3 of us cooking. There was Nico, and there were 3 of us otherwise cooking. And we cooked, and we handed every plate to Nico, and he handed every plate to the waiters and the waitstaff. So he, literally saw every single plate of food. And the menu only changed 4 times a year. So it was spring, summer, autumn, winter. So there was a lot of logic in that, because you could really refine the dishes so that everything, in theory, could be perfect. It was a system to create perfection. Now, you'd have to say it has its flaws in some senses, but
Yeah.
from the point of view of producing beautiful plates of food, it's an ideal setup. And in Nico's kitchen, it was tiny. You had to be super organized, which I liked. Everything had its place, and there was a particular size spoon, a particular wooden spoon, a particular ladle, a particular whisk for each particular task. But there was one little whisk he had, which was, he had one whisk, I remember, for making béarnaise sauce,
Okay.
which was a timber whisk. Anyway, that was for the béarnaise sauce. But there was another spoon. Anyway, I was doing something one day, and the wooden spoon, literally cracked in my hand and broke. And I thought, the wooden spoon was broke. That's, but these things happen. But no, it wasn't like that, because it turned out that was his lucky charm that had come with him through all the various different restaurants he'd worked in. Because he was very interesting. Actually, he started off in the finance world, and for some reason or other, he became obsessed with food, and he was self-trained, and he went off to work in some of the really top restaurants in France, and came back to London with the idea of getting Michelin stars. This goes back to writing a menu that was achievable in a certain size kitchen, etc., etc. But he didn't think it was at all amusing that I'd broken his wooden spoon, and there was a sort of a cloud hung over the kitchen for a few days. But actually, he was one of those days, one of those people. when chefs had big reputations then, some of them, and he had a reputation for being very difficult, which actually he really wasn't. He was just very serious about what he did, and he did certainly once ask somebody to leave his restaurant because they had asked for salt. There was no salt and pepper on the tables, which I personally don't agree with. I think if your guests want salt, you give them salt and let them administer it as they wish. But anyway, but he was actually incredibly kind, generous, intelligent, good man. And I learned an awful lot there about just being organised, really.
Yeah, and then you had lunch with him, and he.
That's right. At the end of my stay, then he gave me a wooden spoon as big as a hurley, which that's Rory's lucky wooden spoon.
Yeah, which is it's really funny because every kitchen I've worked in, every chef's had his lucky spoon or her lucky spoon. So when I read that, I was like, no way would I want that to be me.
Yeah.
At the time, but I mean, like even simple in parts of the book, like you talk about a bunch of flowers for the table. Now I know mindfulness and all that kind of me time and girl bossing, that's all become very important.
Girl bossing.
Well,
I don't understand this.
Sometimes we get tired of girl bossing, but anyway, which brings me to the bunch of flowers for the table. And you say here, a few things say as much as a bunch of flowers on the table. In some way, I like to set the table before I sit down to eat. I like to always have a little pot of blooms, leaves, twigs, or a mixture of all of the above to brighten up the scene and to bring some nature into the house. Where does that come from?
Well, it comes from home, really, from growing up, I'd say. But also, there's a couple of reasons why I cook and why I like to cook. One is I just fell into cooking, really. I never made a professional decision that I would become a cook. I had gone to university after I left school. The expectation would have been that I would have done something professional. And I sort of flunked my exams, and then I did something. I thought I was going to be a fine art auctioneer until I discovered that wasn't nearly as glamorous as it sounded, and that you had to learn things about law and stuff. So, no, that was no interest in that. And a fair bit of other faffing around anyway. And then I ended up working at Ballymena House on reception one summer. And then at the end of the summer, I still hadn't decided what it was I was going to do, inverted commas, professionally. So I asked Mrs. Allen at the time, could I go into the kitchen, because I just wanted to learn how to make a few specific dishes. My mother cooked beautifully when we were growing up, but she didn't make béarnaise sauce and she didn't make hollandaise sauce, so I definitely wanted to learn how to make those. Because when we're working at Ballymena, staff eat the same food as the guests. So you could choose something off the menu, so you got to taste absolutely everything, which was really, really wonderful. But that's maybe not answering your question. But to go back to the flowers, I mean, as a cook, it all starts in the soil, really. And the miracle of having flowers for the table is the same in many ways as the miracle of having potatoes to boil, or a cabbage, or Brussels sprouts, or a plum, or whatever. And even though all of that can be, of course, be explained scientifically, it's still miraculous to me. So a little catkin, or pussybill, as we used to call that. No, that's not pussybill, it's a hazel cat, whatever it is anyway, is just miraculous. So my love of food and love of cooking goes back to that thing, which can be explained scientifically, but for me, it's just tied up in the mystery of life and the complete joy of life. So that's really why I cook. I also love, I love the physical act of cooking. I love repetition. I love chopping things, for ages. I love the craft of cooking. And I think that's something that maybe isn't sometimes spoken about, the almost meditative nature that can happen. If you're making marmalade, for example, and you're chopping for Ireland, all the oranges, and you think, but after a while, as long as you have a good sharp knife and a decent chopping boards, by the way, should be of timber. Yep, because we can grow those. We can't grow the plastic ones. The timber ones are more hygienic than the plastic ones, by the way. That if you do this, read the science and all the rest of it. But anyway, I was getting off the subject. But the meditative nature of cooking, I also sort of love. Now, some people will be thinking you got 6 kids to feed, and that's nothing meditative about that. But in a well-run kitchen, where things are organised and happy, and when cooks are being asked to do not the impossible, but what's possible. then they can be the happiest, most joyful places.
Yeah.
Really, truly.
Well, for me, I always compare making jam for an hour or two cheaper than seeing a psychologist.
Yes.
Because it's the ultimate calm you can get to yourself because you have
Yeah.
to concentrate.
Yes, yeah. The other thing about cooking is, I mean, certainly from my point of view, as at that time, a very, very long time ago, as a young man who didn't know what on earth I was going to do with my life, and to discover that by accident in a professional kitchen, something I'd never thought about it before, that when you cook, you get a result very quickly, and it's good or it's bad. And if it isn't good, you get a chance to do it again later on in the day, maybe for dinner or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's really quite a thing. If you haven't been particularly academic and you weren't getting A's or B's, to go in and suddenly discover that you have the capacity to cook, and that you can create something that's really pretty good and is tangible. That was a huge thing for me. Amazing.
Yeah, and we get to the point of sandwiches and tartines. Is it tartines?
Tartines, yes.
Tartines. Now, do any of you know what a tartine is? Because I didn't till this morning.
Yes.
It's an open sandwich. I didn't know that.
Yes.
till
Well,
this
the problem
morning.
is with tartines, strictly speaking, it's not a sandwich.
No.
Because strictly speaking, a sandwich is 2 slices of bread with something in the middle. But a tartine is just a single slice of bread with something on top of it. That's strictly speaking. But there you go. That's splitting hairs, I suppose.
Yeah, but I just love the whole fact that you have kind of 2 full dedicated pages.
But that's a bit of a rant, to be perfectly
Yeah,
honest.
which is I picked out oil rants because
Yeah.
for me they're just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
So can you tell them about this rant?
Well, that rant, it's about sandwiches. And, actually, and this goes back to, I remember in Ballymloo with Mrs. Allen, and everything mattered, really, to be honest. And because it was a hotel, it was from the first cup of tea in the morning and the porridge and where the sausages came from and whose bacon it was for the rashers. So everything mattered. But one of the things that could throw the kitchen into complete disarray was if a guest ordered a picnic. Oh, Christ, somebody's ordered a picnic. And Mrs. Allen would go down to the fridges and see what was in the fridges and this, that, and the other. But she took making sandwiches, so seriously. It had to be, bread buttered right out to the crust, because heaven forbid you get a bit of dry bread with no butter on it. And then the correct proportion of filling in the middle, and then another piece of bread on top. And then things would be wrapped in greaseproof paper, and, it was a real care. It was really old-fashioned hospitality. It wasn't grand. It wasn't, the Ritz or anything like that, but it was really grand in that, the emotion involved was old-fashioned hospitality and doing things properly. But the notion for her that you could have a sandwich, or if my mother, or perhaps even your mother, where the bread was this thick, but the filling was that thick. Well, that's not a sandwich. That's something else. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
It's something else. And because with a sandwich, the idea is you can pick it up and eat it, take a bite, and maybe put it down again, if that's allowed. I'm not sure. And you could do that with a degree of elegance. But what I'm talking about are the sandwiches that, white knuckles, that sort of job, back to the wall, going in, standing upright.
The New York.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. It can be, of course, wonderful and all the rest of it. But it definitely comes from a very different place that my sandwich making sort of came from.
Which is one of my favorite kind of quote or chapters, as you call them in the book. I drifted off topic there slightly. So getting back to the cucumber sandwich. It was a morsel you could get into your mouth with one hand while carrying on a lovely chat and occasionally taking a sip of tea, all at the same time looking fabulous and in control.
Well, cucumber sandwich is interesting because they sound so twee nowadays as cucumber sandwich, but actually
They're delicious.
white bread, buttered, thinly sliced peeled cucumber, a pinch of salt, sea salt ideally, and then another piece of bread on top. And it's actually really truly delicious, and they're a gastronomic experience. But you can imagine if your bread is that thick, and the cucumber is that thick, and the bread is that thick on top, it's a completely different thing altogether. But yeah, but the cucumber sandwich fulfills the criteria in many ways for eating a sandwich and looking great at the same time.
So we're going to go to the cucumber and the correct sandwich to the correct candle while dining.
Right, okay, well,
Right, this is another rant.
What?
Right, this is another rant in here about candles.
yeah, I mean, again, I suppose I light a candle every evening. Lots of people light candles, but again, there's something about when you light a fire and you light a candle, same thing. It's that again, science can't explain it all. But there is, you find yourself staring into the candle or into the fire and wondering, there's something sort of mysterious about it, isn't there?
No, absolutely.
Yeah. And also, I think lighting a candle, it's somewhat symbolic. For me, it feels a little bit symbolic because it is, maybe it's because we associate candles with church and the I'm not finding the word at church. The formality and all of the rest of it. But when you strike a match and light a candle, it's superfluous. It's utterly superfluous exercise, really, because nowadays candles aren't to give light; they're to give atmosphere. And somehow or other, it strikes a chord in me. But I don't. It's an ordinary candle, like an altar candle. But I don't like scented candles on the table of any description, really. But I do like a good scented candle.
To hear your top two hated candles are Fruits of the Forest and Cool Breeze.
Well, yeah, there's
Cool
something-
Ocean Breeze.
I mean, there's an awful lot of candles really that are just. I find them noxious. But anyway, but lighting candles, everything. It's
Which is-
light,
it's
whether you
really
believe
funny.
it or not. When you go into a church, and whether you believe it or not, whether you're a believer, and there's those candles there to be lit, and you light them for your loved ones, pastor or whatever. Doesn't matter if you believe in God or anything, or the person whose experience is supposed to be in that building, the church. It's still something lovely about it, isn't there? It's kind of, I think it's primal.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
absolutely beautiful. And
yeah.
the Aboriginals in Australia actually believe that's why they don't really think of houses as a entity of something as a home. Wherever the fire is their home.
Yes, yeah.
So there is something absolutely primal
Yeah,
about that.
yeah.
The whole candle, the flame, the atmosphere of the flowers, the plain candle, not the scented candle. So no to the Ocean Breeze and Fruits of the Forest.
Yes, no, none of those. Thank you very much.
And big sandwiches. But we're going to go on to talk a bit about Aunt Florence and the picnics in Tremor.
Yeah. Well, Auntie Florence first. Auntie Florence was my mother's sister, and she's still very much alive, thank God. She lives with us in Shanagarry. She's in the Gate Lodge at school, and she potters up for lunch every day at the school. I think she's 85 now, and she chats to all the students. She finds out all the goings-on that we wouldn't be able to find out about, which is quite useful when you're running a school, actually.
You will. And
So she
sorry
has-
to interrupt you. If you do follow Dorina, she's always on Dorina's Instagram page doing something or other.
Yes, yeah. But that's Auntie Florence. But Auntie Florence then is famous for lots of things. But
Yeah.
she makes an orange cake. And when we were growing up, we spent quite a bit of time with Auntie Florence, actually. And we'd go hunting and all the rest of it. And Florence would always have, you never left home with about a bit of cake. And there would always be a tin in the boot of the car with a little bit of Auntie Florence's cake in it. What was the question again? What were we on there?
Just about like growing up with Aunt Florence and the
Oh, yeah.
picnics, because the picnics
Oh yeah,
just
picnics.
seem
Yeah,
so
picnics
magical.
are a huge thing, really, definitely. And for lots of reasons, I think I was one of 9 children, so clearly it was cheaper to feed people out of the boot of the car than going into restaurants and hotels and all that sort of thing. But actually, we just loved it, and it made so much sense, never to be stuck. And mostly picnics were organised, and whether it was going to Tremor, because I grew up in County Laois, landlocked Laois, and we swam in the local river every summer, which we loved all of the time. But then the day at the beach was Tremor in County Waterford, that incredible, long, beautiful beach, and the water there was salty and all the rest of it. But that was a particular thing, and the picnic preparation started the previous day, and with the roasting of a chicken or the making of a cake or whatever it happened to be. And again, it was just sort of what we did,
Yeah.
And there was 2 little fields outside of Tremor, tiny little fields near the Metal Man. You know where that's Metal Man sculpture is? And that's where we always went for our picnic. And, it's incredible. incredibly precious memory. I mean, we didn't eat in restaurants growing up. Most of us here probably didn't eat in restaurants growing up, and or that sort of thing. So, so the picnic even was a reality, and but it was very special.
Yeah, and what I like at the end of the book is that, like, I think it's near the end when, you started going to boarding school and you kind of poo-pooed the idea of the picnic anymore and all that because, you got invited to hotels.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
And then you got to a hotel and the food wasn't half as good.
Yeah,
as
that's right.
the
Yeah,
picnic
my mother
food.
used to come and visit us at school, and she'd bring a picnic. And I thought that the other boys were doing much better being taken off to the Anner Hotel in no, it wasn't the Anner. What was it in Roscrea? Anyway, whatever it was, and that's at the much grander. And anyway, I was kindly asked to go. A friend of mine, his parents asked me to go one day, and I discovered actually that what was coming out of the basket in the back of my mother's car was significantly
Much better.
Was definitely was more to my liking at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know this because my older brother went to boarding school and we used to bake for him and send him up tins on the bus.
Yes.
Yeah. So that comes from there. But there was 9 of you in Leash.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and it says here one of the really beautiful one is here talking about your mum. My mother fed us beautifully. The food made more delicious by the love that went into preparing it. Feeding 9 hungry mouths, she must have felt like a mother sparrow relentlessly returning to the nest to chirping hungry beaks. The table was always set with a little bunch of flowers. It wasn't grand, but it was civilized. And it's just the way that you speak about her. And it's like, like I haven't been home for 3 years, so every time that just hits you right in the heart. There's something special. The way that you talk about your mother is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I promised. I said I wouldn't cry.
I'm starting to cry, by the way.
What is it about mothers? Yeah, it was. I mean, again, it was. It was the reality of our life. She cooked for us. She very much believes, as many mothers did, that your food was your health, and she was very focused on that. But we ate everything, and that was, whatever was for lunch or for supper, you ate it. There wasn't a question of that this was what you didn't like and what you did like. And if it was chicken necks or gizzards, which we adored, it wasn't always that, but we got used to eating all of those things. We ate a lot of offal, kidneys and liver, and we used to put chicken necks and gizzards and hearts and make a stock. And we would slice the hearts very thinly, and the gizzards also very thinly. We'd have it on brown soda bread and butter, and we absolutely loved it. And the next we used to just pick up and eat them. And she didn't say, I don't think she explained exactly what part of the creature we were eating, but I think we sort of knew that was you just did. But the food was delicious and real, and there was always food, and because there was always cooking going on. You were always learning, really. And at certain points, she used to have there was a little list, there was a little sort of rota for little jobs you do in the house. And one to be on one day to be somebody's job to peel the spuds or whatever. And we took all those sort of things for granted, and it was just a form of housekeeping.
Which made complete common sense because you were a tribe.
Yes,
there was 9 of you. You were a bit of a team.
But she was a really, really good cook. And she loved to cook, and not everybody loves to cook, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of other things you can love to do.
Yeah, we're all good at other things.
So, but it was good conflux from that point of view, that she loved to cook and she was a good cook.
Yeah.
And her mother had been a wonderful cook, and her father loved his food. So there was that, appreciation and sitting down, and food and supper being nearly almost the point of the day.
Yes.
One of the reasons for working was that you could sit down and eat something delicious at the end of the day. But we just ate everything, and we gobbled it up, and irritatingly would ask my mother what was for supper when we were finished lunch, and that must have driven her over the edge.
Oh, you would, yeah. And you do a whole little branty subject here about Jane Gregson.
Yeah. So this particular book. The Joy of Food, and then it's a celebration of good things to eat. So Jane Gregson, who I'm sure many of you know, was a wonderful English food writer who isn't as well known as she should be. As far as I'm
No.
concerned, she's just as important as Elizabeth David. And one of the really great books she wrote was called Good Things. And there were little stories and little, very simple little line illustrations. And we have cooked from that book from first page to the last page, and with some recipes that we've been cooking out of that book for 30 years, which are still absolutely unchanged from when we started to cook them. And there's real joy in that, actually, when you come across a recipe that's just perfect. And don't mess with it. Leave it alone. Don't try to make it your own, for God's sake.
No.
You know, Jane did that. And she actually came to the school several times over the years. And her husband, Geoffrey, was a very famous poet, actually. And then her daughter, Sophie, is a wonderful cook and food writer. But that book was really important. And many cookery books have been important in my cooking life, but that was one of the most important books. Very gentle, beautiful food. That was a time when cooks and cookery writers looked to France a lot. And it's interesting the way we look to France much less than we used to, actually. That's another whole other day's work, another discussion. But we did, and yeah, Jane Gregson was a great food writer. And then the expression, if something is a good thing, like you come across a recipe for a cake and you make and taste it and say, that's a really good thing, you know. And then those two words have become, a way of describing a particular type of dish and a particular recipe. Actually, Jeremy Lee, the great chef in Quo Vadis in London, he uses that expression all the time as well.
Yeah, which would be one of my favourite chefs on earth.
Yeah.
His mutton pie.
Yes.
Is legendary.
Yeah.
With Jane, though, her Mrs. Dillon's sponge, particularly, where she wrote about Mrs. Dillon and how people dedicate certain recipes to certain people.
Yeah, well, is in relation to. So, when I was growing up, I can't remember my mother having any, maybe one or two sort of printed books like this. All the recipes were in, handwritten, copybooks and notebooks, hard books, covered with oilcloths, the usual thing, usually handwritten, or there'd be recipes given from a friend or whatever, and they'd be pasted into sort of scrapbooks, that sort of thing, or pages taken out of a magazine article. And that's where the recipes were. So it wasn't actually really until I went and started cooking in Ballymaloon. Mrs. Allen used to buy cookery books all of the time, and we would be cooking from cookery books, as distinct from my mother's recipes, which had come sort of from friends and down through the generations or whatever. So it was quite a different thing.
And I love this one here. I adore my mother's books, but I find nowadays I have to be in the correct frame of mind before I even open them. Any little clink in the emotional armour can be chiselled into a larger fissure of loss, and then when I see her perfect script, somehow print just doesn't affect me in the same way.
Yeah, it's
which is true to the book.
Well, when somebody handwriting, it's like get a letter, and you get used to what somebody's handwriting looks like, and it's gas. Everybody's handwriting is ever so slightly different, but people had beautiful handwriting.
Or
then,
what
I think,
mood they're in as well, Rory, when they're writing it.
Well, no, I don't think mood affected my mother's handwriting.
Yeah,
because
she was steady and stable.
Learned how to write as I did with a nib and ink. But anyway, but it's when it's that handwriting and the falling and the rising of the letters and all of that sort of thing, and when you know that handwriting and you know the personality behind it, it's a very lovely thing.
No, it's something beautiful,
Yeah.
and there's something beautiful the way that you talk in the book, and the way that you cook is everything that you come across as you are in person. That, like, I feel like when I was asked to speak today, to kind of intro the book with Rory, I was like, this is brilliant, because if this was Mastermind, he would be my specialist subject. So I'm just going to look...
That's slightly alarming, I wonder.
So I'm just going to look like a big creep. So, which is quite funny, but... yeah,
I take that as a great compliment.
Thank you. I meant
Jess.
it as that.
I know you do.
Thank you. Which brings me round to, is there anything you want to talk about specifically in the book?
I don't I'm not a serial cookery book writer. This is my third cookery book, and I'm not sure I want to write another one. And I don't write a cookery book until I have an idea to write one. I can't churn one out every year because I like to sort of find my own recipes and test them and do all of that sort of thing. And until I've got I just run out of ideas.
No,
And
yeah.
then I think most professional cooks, I go through periods where I feel completely stale and out of touch and being left behind, and not, or just, not with. And then you'll go to a market, or you'll come across something, and then suddenly it all starts again, and you start to get ideas for new dishes. Actually, it's an interesting case in point, because this wonderful cake that you've brought, Rachel and Dre and I are going to do a demonstration to raise money online for Ukraine next Tuesday evening. But I thought, well, I can't just do Irish stew on that. Well, I could actually, but so I immediately, when we decided, I suggested last week, and I ran upstairs to the library at the cookery school to find the books of Olia Hercules. I was a wonderful London-based Ukrainian cook. And then I went home, I wasn't teaching that afternoon, and did a couple of things, and I found 2 wonderful new recipes.
Okay,
and I
brilliant.
feel, which is really ironic actually, and maybe disturbed me, but I feel sort of invigorated again, in a way, about new ideas and discovering new food cultures. And that's sort of, again, it's more than ironic. I don't know what the word to describe that is, given the circumstances that have arisen to drive me up the stairs to find Olia's books and so on. But anyway, there you go. But what I was saying is, so this particular book, it's just a mishmash of different recipes that I've collected over a few years. And I wanted then to be able to speak about a little bit more freely than I could in other books about why I like to cook.
Yeah.
And why sometimes I like the notion of a cucumber sandwich being just that.
Yeah.
And why and why my mother's influence was and remains so important, and why the combination of working in sort of starry Michelin-y starred sort of restaurants, how all that feeds into my teaching. Because the last thing in the world I ever thought I'd end up being as a teacher, but I'm a teacher, and I have been now for many years, and I love teaching. And I'm in a very fortunate position as a teacher, because I know there are other wonderful teachers in this room, but not everybody goes into a classroom of students who want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
Sometimes do, but I'm very fortunate that, generally speaking, when I stand up at the cookery school, the students there, they want to hear what I have to say, and that's fantastic. That's sort of a gift for me, really.
Absolutely.
And because I'm passionate about eating and cooking, and every part of cooking, as I mentioned, the craft and the meditative nature, and how, in some cases, apart from it being physically healing, it can also be emotionally and mentally healing for people to cook. It really can. I mean, this brings us, back, to the whole sort of thing of immigrants and immigration and direct provision, and people, immigrants arriving into Ireland over the last few decades, where they didn't have access to a kitchen.
No.
And where you want to just make that particular stew that just brings you home for a few minutes, and have access to a kitchen to be able to do that. And that's, I know there's a realization, and that great progress is being made on that front now, giving people the right to a kitchen to cook for themselves. It can sound a bit vacuous to say that, but it's really a thing.
Well, when I started working for the UNHCR, and I started interviewing ladies that were in direct provision. Sorry, keep on looking at Rory. When I was interviewing ladies in direct provision, the only thing that they wanted to do was cook pancakes for the kids on Pancake Tuesday, because all their classmates were doing pancakes. And I was like, of anything, I'm from New Zealand, I don't have kids, so I'd never heard of Pancake Tuesday until I looked into it. And they were like, all they wanted to do was pancakes. It's like, how pathetic, you can't make a pancake. This is we need, how is the communities going to grow together and bond together, it's those kind of recipes that I think we're all good at cooking in a crisis. And I think there's a lot of recipes that were made from immigration and cooking in a crisis. When you look at the Anzac biscuits, when you look at all the World War II cakes,
Well, completely, but I mean,
You know?
also the way cooking has evolved over the last few years. Take Middle Eastern cooking, for example, and the way that's now sort of everywhere. Everybody knows what hummus is,
yeah,
and all those things. And so many of those cuisines are built on the different the movements of different people, and different ingredients being brought, and different recipes being brought from one part of the world to another part of the world, and then using the recipe with the ingredients from the new part of the world, and all of that wonderful evolution. And that just makes us bigger and stronger and more integrated and more admiring of other cultures and more respectful of other cultures. And there can't be too much of that, I don't think.
no, it's absolutely brilliant. And I mean, like we are like integrating, like Ireland is such an amazing, like we all are integrating really, really well together. And Ireland is, one of those the most amazing welcoming countries that I've come across. And I can say that as an immigrant myself, but like I've been working, I worked on the Syrian border, and I was working with a group of women, refugees from Damascus at the time. And one really interesting fact, because one family were moving to Ireland, and in fact they were getting moved to like Burr and Offaly, and I was like, you know what? We have hummus in Ireland. And they were like, no. And I was like, yeah, we have hummus in Ireland. I said, we sell it in supermarkets. They were like, they couldn't believe it. And I said, but we put garlic in it. They were like, oh, I'm not into that. Not into that. But, it's just so, you can have so much fun. You don't have to speak the same language. You could just always have the crack with food. And, food heals all sorrows as well.
Yeah, and it sustains you.
Yeah.
The other thing about that, the book, the little drawings, which are very naive,
Oh, yes.
are not as a result of any artistic talent, but I started, you may have read this in the book, but I've always kept notebooks, like many people do, just for recipe ideas and writing down recipes and all the rest of it. But anyway, I was on my iPhone one day, where I also keep notes, and I discovered the little pencil icon, and I started drawing. I thought, oh my God. And that's how these little drawings evolved. Some of them done on my iPhone, some of them done on my iPad. And they're very naive, and I say in the book, I don't have any artistic talent. And sometimes if you do something like this, I can see in a way why they might, sort of cause offense to somebody who spent a long time learning how to draw and learning the craft of drawing and all of that, and think, look, who is your man with his finger and his phone? But on the other hand, I feel, for me, there's some of the emotion that I feel as a cook in them. And that's really all I was trying to do. I wasn't trying to start a new career in drawing. That's not going to happen.
But it was only until I read the chapter about doodles that I thought that I discovered that you did them. I actually thought they were done by an illustrator.
No. I just did them on. I did them on my iPhone and then on my iPad, and then we managed to get them
appropriately numbered. Page 69. You see my doodles. So yeah, I suppose. Will we talk a bit about what you bought today and what we're going to?
Yeah, I mean, it's so wonderful to be here at St. Tola, and thank you, all the family, Siobhan, everybody. It's just so special. And so much of what I do as a cook, is can't be done without the cheesemakers and the sausage makers and the farmers, the fishermen, and all of the rest of us. You'd just be standing there, twiddling your thumbs if nothing came in the back door in terms of the ingredients. So it's so incredibly important. And I think also that it's really amazing what's happening in Irish food at the moment.
Yep.
So I don't know, maybe it was 15 years ago or 20 years ago, maybe about 15 years ago, a lot of young Irish men and women went north to Copenhagen, and then they spread out. Then some of them went south to Australia, New Zealand, and all over. And now a lot of them are back. And there's really incredible things going on.
Oh, amazing.
And a great pride, like we've always had in Irish ingredients. But because when you get used to it, certainly when we travel abroad, I'd sometimes get asked, what is Irish cooking? And it would be, not that it was difficult to explain what it was, but you certainly would not have had a discussion as long as if you're asked, what is French cooking? or what is Italian cooking. And then it's interesting because you start to talk about our history and the socioeconomic, the different socioeconomic situation of the vast majority of people who lived in Ireland, and and then our cuisine sort of developed in a much sort of less grand way. There was wonderful cooking, but it was going on behind high walls and in a very, very small little sort of situation. But anyway, that's all changing, and I think that what's happening in Irish food is just absolutely astonishing. I brought a few little things with me, which I thought, because we're celebrating several cheeses, but of course we're celebrating St. Tola, and this is the case in point, again, as a cook. When you take a little cheese like St. Tola, this is the one, the little log with the ash rind, and you put it on a plate made by an Irish, sadly now deceased, ceramic artist, a man called John French, the late John French. But anyway, I mean, there you have, thing of perfection, really. You suddenly have world-class food. I mean, really, world-class food. If I was going to put anything else on that, I might put a tiny little dribble of honey, local honey, or what else did I bring? I brought a few little things with me. So I just might as well show you what I brought. Pennyworth. Everybody know Pennyworth at the moment? It's on the walls everywhere. So this is also called Walker's Friends, because it's a succulent, so it's full of water. So you'd pick it off the walls when you're walking, and it's like a thirst quencher. That's delicious. So you could some of that would be absolutely lovely. A lovely local honey would be drizzled delicious on it, with the goat's cheese. And again, this slightly goes back to Ole Hercules, and doing a bit of research last week. I don't know why I'd never cooked blackberries. These are last year's blackberries, which I froze. I know lots of people pick blackberries. Actually, one of the things we do every autumn, we put up a sign in the local shops and in the local post office saying blackberries wanted. And we get 100 weights of blackberries and we freeze them. And that is the height of sustainability. And we use them all year round. And yesterday I poached a few blackcurrants with a plum, one of last year's plums as well, with a little sweet geranium. Now, if you don't have a sweet geranium plant, you need to get one, I would say. And this lovely rose and scented. Anyway, a little bit of sugar and water, blackberries and plums. And that would be delicious also with your goat's cheese. Be absolutely wonderful. Yes, Siobhan. Oh, good Lord.
Oh, we're having a child.
Is it going to be Jess or Rory? How amazing.
Oh.
And is there do the goats do a particular thing when the others, is this?
Yeah, they went over first of all to see which, but they've moved back now. Just Patrol and John are up there helping her.
Okay. How amazing. Miracle of life, huh? Isn't that really wonderful? Special to be here for that. What else is there? Then, sorry, that's all right. What? No, that's much more important than my old twittering on. I'll tell you that much. that the goat. Is it a boy or a girl?
Are we good?
Two.
Oh.
Hopefully it's two Rorys.
I'm sure. Two Rorys, that's it. I'm sure the poor nanny goat is wondering, will they ever go home? Anyway, a couple of other little things. This lovely apple juice, basically, which has been boiled down to a syrup, Irish orchard apple syrup. And this is made by the Calder Pots up in Kilkenny. You could actually make it yourself if you make apple juice and just reduce it down in a saucepan. And that would be delicious. And then I brought those little rose petals, and there's pistachio nuts, and there's dates, and there's beetroot, and all the usual things you'd expect that would be delicious with the goat's cheese. But really, it's in St. Ole here. It's just all about the cheese, isn't it? It's all about the cheese.
Yep.